I wanted to have a look at the draft a course of lectures and manuals for practical classes called Translation of Patent Documentations for the students of graduate for graduate students at the departments of translation.
Я в свое время работал, то есть частично в военной сфере, и также дальше я назвал какие-то учебные заведения, где это практикуется, а также в чем мы видим наше будущее относительно пособий, практики и теории перевода, патентной документации. Также я хотел бы предложить сотрудничество с участниками конференции в достижении поставленных задач. Итак, переходим к конкретике. Что касается перевода патентов в городе Львове, потому что в свое время мы делали...
So about the translation of patents in Lviv, I can say that I have attended some institutions and organizations, and I would like to say again that I represent Lviv Polytechnic University. So we have our patent department, and of course I asked this department what is going on. So they do not actually translate patents, but they provide consultations to those who are engaged in translating patents in Ukraine, and also they help with patent applications. Also, we have a translation agency called Linguistics Center, and we have Tatjana Struk here at the conference with us. But Tatjana told me that they do not translate patents. Also, we have Polyglot Translation Agency. They also told me that they do not work with patents, though I know the director of this agency, and she has her technical background and she could actually work on patent documents, but she said that nobody actually asks them to translate any patents. Also, we have in our city Lviv a Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and also we have foreign languages centers, Azbuka Svitu, and they said that we do translate patents, we can translate patents, but it costs a lot. It's like 120 hryvnias per page. I said no, it's not so expensive actually. And we have Loyalty Translation Agency, and they said that they can provide translation of patents, but in fact I just wanted to ask all those agencies if they could theoretically do it. I did not have any practical need in such kind of translation. So what I also tried to understand why we have such situation with translation of patents. And for what I understand, we do not have specialists who could do it. Though I can say that I work in Lviv Polytechnic University for quite a long time. And in the 80s, back in the USSR, when I was fourth-year student, it was mandatory to train students to translate patents from English into Russian or Ukrainian, because it was back in the USSR, and it was a must. So all the graduate students, like for example students at their fourth year, they were trained to translate patents. Also, I personally had to translate patents, and I know that one of the copies had to be sent to Moscow because they were collecting all the translations in Russian, at least. I'm not sure about other languages. Another copy was given to the customer, and the third copy was left with the translator for reporting purposes. So this work was done back then, and so we can ask ourselves a question: why don't we do it now? So I have told that we had to send one a copy of patent translation to Moscow back then, and I do not know about such requirements now. I don't think that translation agencies send any copies of translated patents to Kiev, for example. So why aren't people interested? And what could be done about it? So I had a look to understand who actually provides training in patent translation in Ukraine. And I saw that we have a relevant department of business, foreign languages, and translation at the National Technical University in Kharkiv. Also, there is a relevant department in Kharkiv National University named by Vasilka Karazin. And also there are some other departments of translation and applied linguistics in other educational institutions. And also foreign languages departments in different institutes and universities. It is usually not a must. It is for those people who are interested in such kind of training. Also, I made a research to see if we have proper training materials to train translators in translation of patent documents. So if we do not have relevant manuals, it wouldn't be possible to provide such kind of training. So as in Kharkiv, there is a relevant training for translators to translate patents. Most of the relevant guides and manuals they are actually published in Kharkiv. So we have manuals by Professor Chernovati and by Tsareva with the relevant methodological guidelines. And I have already mentioned that Lviv Polytechnic University has experience of training students in translating of patents. So there are teachers and professors who did that, and including myself. And also there are some remote or distance courses on the theory and practice of translation. So I'm also engaged in the delivery of such courses, and we had such departments at the military institute in Lviv also. There are some methodological guidelines which are recent and which were published in 2015. So this is the document I prepared for the students and military students in the Lviv State University of Life Safety. So those are the manuals and guidelines that I know. Maybe there are some others which I am not aware of, so I will be glad if you tell me about them. Apart from that, working in the Lviv State University of Life Safety, together with the students, we prepared a draft of English-Ukrainian dictionary of patent terms, but it has to be finalized and published, which has not been done yet. So let's go further now. So I have already mentioned I have said a couple of words about the training materials available. And I have talked about the experience of training in patent translation that in Lviv, in the Polytechnic University, we did have such experience in the 80s. And my thesis was actually called Structural and Functional Peculiarities of English Terminology on Robotics. Robotics then was just established as an industry, and we made this dictionary on robotics, so with English and Ukrainian languages, and also there were patent terms related to robotics. First of all, we looked at American, Australian, and Canadian patents, and at the conferences, when I was talking about it, considering that robotics was being established back then, people were asking me from Moscow and from St. Petersburg, asking me to translate the patents that they needed translated, because they knew that I worked with this topic, they knew that I know the terminology, and that I can provide this kind of translation. So why I'm talking about all these things? I want to say that now I work in Kiev Polytechnic, Lviv Polytechnic University again. So we work now also with the Japanese language, and I have found specialists in Lviv who agreed to cooperate with me in the development of training materials for translation of patent documents. And I have mentioned already the methodological guidelines published in 2015. Back then, I organized the other educators, and we prepared a course of lectures where we analyzed the patent descriptions in English, so from the US, Canada, Australia, and the UK, and also patents with the help of specialists in French and German who agreed to prepare some materials for the course of the lectures and for the practical guidelines to translate patent descriptions from German, French, and Polish. So in fact, I have a draft of those guidelines. It is still a draft document of a course of lectures. So I will tell you later what this course consists of, and we started working on the manuals for the practical classes to train students to translate patent descriptions.
Next, having analyzed who has been doing it in Ukraine, I also looked through the thesis for a PhD, and it turned out that there is this person, Zadorozhny, in our department who deals with German. There is a lady named Klepikova. She studied translation from English. And also one more a paper that I used for my analysis. I analyzed English, and well, this has been done by me. there are other researchers whom I don't know yet. So I decided to show what I did in my PhD thesis because the topic was structural applied mathematical linguistics. When I had my thesis written, and now it is called Applied Linguistics. So I did it in the city of Leningrad back then, and Petrovsky and Alexeyev were my scientific advisors who assisted me in this scientific research. So the structure of terms, for instance, and their distribution in the text. Why do we need that? Well, that's necessary for machine translation. And especially taking into account that Petrovsky had a group back then under the title The Statistics of Language, and I was a part of that. Or also introducing terms into text. This is something else that sounds weird but is necessary for machine translation. Also, saturation of text with terminology, how it's happening in patent text. Also, I analyzed the conference materials on robotics and also journal articles. So also from the 4 countries that were mentioned here, I was using English-speaking magazines, and we did not have any dictionaries back then, and I was the one who composed the first one. And there is a special methodology on how to develop the dictionary whenever there are no dictionaries available. And in my PhD, I analyzed this. And as one esteemed professor, Lechik, has noted, he came from Odessa but lived in Moscow. So he mentioned that there are 3 different topics covered in your thesis, and that this would be sufficient for 3 people to get their PhD. But still, this was quite an interesting work for me, and I was okay with doing more than expected. And now, on this next level of my work in Lviv Polytechnic University, as I have told before, I worked there. After that, I worked for a military educational institution, and now I work for Lviv Polytechnic University once again. So I see that the materials on translation from, let's say, British, Canadian, Australian versions of English, I could assist in that. My second language, by the way, is German, and we also have one researcher who is Mr. Zadorozhny, and he researched the patent documentation of Germany and Austria, so he's capable to do that without my assistance. And I started to collect all those materials while working in Lviv Polytechnic University. And I didn't want to contact the specialists in my previous educational institution, because there was quite a big churn rate in that institution, and I started to look for colleagues in my Lviv Polytechnic University. How many of teachers do you think we have in our foreign language department? Well, we have about 100 of them, and we have quite many people with whom we could collaborate, and some grants are offered for that purpose, but this work needs to be begun, and it needs to be begun in a serious way. So, what do I plan to do in the nearest time? when I started talking about this with my colleagues who live abroad, like Ukrainians, for instance, who moved to foreign countries. Also, some people were interested in my research before, and we are still keep in touch. I started contacting them, including the Ukrainians in the diaspora, including foreigners interested in that and who reside in those countries. I decided that once we start doing it, this needs to be done seriously. So, apart from having some materials about English in Britain, Australia, Canada, etc., there are my friends who reside there, who know English of that particular country, and also who know Ukrainian. And also, apart from them, since we have already made some beginning while I worked for my previous educational institution, I also started to look for people who can assist me with German, French, Polish, and maybe also Japanese textbooks. Maybe there are other languages as well, maybe not right now, but there are participants here at this conference who could be interested in other languages, so we could broaden that scope later, but there is already some basis and we could build on that. We have some basis of creating textbooks, and this is something that had been done in Kharkiv. This could be an example to follow later in creating other materials. So some people told me that you needn't think too much about, let's say, British variant of English, but I answered that I can see the differences, and if I only follow the American patent model, I will not notice a lot of interesting peculiarities, and they could be studied, they could be taken into account, like the British, Australian, Canadian peculiarities, or it could also be combined into one textbook, and this could be illustrated with some examples so that people would be able to learn. And also there are additional languages which are also represented in our linguistics departments, and if they could undertake this task, this would be quite useful. So who are my possible partners in this? Well, first of all, as I have told before, there is a number of university teachers who are ready to assist me, but still this is quite a complicated task, and even if they have agreed, maybe this can be too complicated for them. Also, there are people working for the patent offices in the countries of study. I started from the British patent office, and they asked me, what do you want from us? Well, I explained them my goal and the research I want to do, and they answered that they can provide information about themselves, about the patent office, but of course this is already available on the internet, and as a person who knows English, I can read that without any special assistance. But something that they really could do for me, that for instance there are some Ukrainians teaching in their country, and they could help me find contacts of those people. And I asked if they were ready to provide this kind of assistance, and they said yes. So the process has already started. And also I have contacted patent offices of the other countries mentioned here, well, maybe except the US, because maybe no one can do it better than they are doing that already. And so I can see some potential helpers in this among the participants of this conference. Maybe they are not exactly here right now, but this information will be shared later, and so this creates the prospects for future research. So here you can see the educational materials that are already created, and they are sufficient to make some first steps. It's been done in Kharkiv, and it can also be done in other educational institutions where, for instance, technical translation is taught, and also in cooperation with translation agencies, businesses, which are represented here quite well. Well, maybe this also can be fruitful if you share some ideas with me. Maybe you can be the co-author of such an educational material, and we can move forward in this. And also I could be developing a distance learning course, and everything that I have already developed, like the lectures on this subject, lectures on each of the countries represented here. So it includes some information about the structure of patent descriptions and also some peculiarities of the translation process, and also the literature that can be used for that. So I have the draft of those lectures, and now the task is to develop the educational aids, the textbooks, so that I would be able to teach people to translate patents using the examples of the English language. Well, some people may reply that software is doing this quite well already, and I tried to use software. Well, the results are not that promising as of now. So this is my opinion, at least. Maybe I used some wrong software, maybe something is more modern, better, etc. There are things that can be improved, but still we people are always more advanced than a machine. Thank you for your attention, and I'm open for collaboration. Any questions? Bohdan, could you please explain? Have I understood it correctly that you are collecting materials from foreign sources, trying to systematize it in some way, and to teach people to translate them into Ukrainian? Is this your main task? Because there is one more quite relevant task: how to translate Ukrainian patents into English, and the requirements are quite serious. The syntax, the grammar, the vocabulary, etc. Yeah, that's the second stage. Okay, what do I mean by assistance? So, in order to realize what I want to do, first we could consider this textbook that's made in Kharkiv. So, using the example of translating English patents into Ukrainian, I would like to make a textbook of translating patents from different versions of English, just like it's already been done from the American English. Some things repeat themselves, but some are different. And also, the languages that I have mentioned, such as German, French, Polish, and Japanese. On these languages we do not have materials anymore yet, and also I'm looking for people who would help me to make these kinds of textbooks. So this requires selection of materials, like British patents, for instance, showing how to translate this into Ukrainian, maybe compare it with a translation of American patterns, and I didn't have a time for that before, but right now I've got more time because I got my doctor's degree already. But let's imagine the following situation. We are translators and someone makes an order for us to translate a patent. So what would be your advice on where to look for guidelines? So if we already know the language, if we can translate, but what are the sources, what are the textbooks we can use, some guidelines maybe, for us to use those in our translation? Well, I have mentioned that before, and these textbooks are a good basis. We put a lot of effort into them, and I've seen other textbooks as well, but these ones are perfect. So like Tsareva and Chernovati, and there is some advice for teachers on how to do that in practice. There are some teaching guidelines. If we were able to do something like that for other languages as well. So yes, we offered some collaboration to them, but they think it's sufficient for them, the things that they have done already. But I do encourage them to continue, because if we don't do it, well, maybe no one else will do it. And also I could work on German, and still I would need some assistance with French, with Japanese, with Polish. And if we are able to add some other languages, such as Romanian or Hungarian, that's also good. But we have to begin with something. And if you have the textbook on how to translate from a foreign language into Ukrainian, this can be used as a basis for translation from Ukrainian into another language. So you need to start from learning at least something, and of course if you want to learn everything at once, that makes the mission impossible. And also there are international grants available. The question was who provides the grants? Well, over the time that well, where should I begin? For quite some time I was the dean or head of the institute. On my previous work, one of my duties was to establish contacts, and I established so many contacts back then, but then I changed my place of work, and so I already know people who can provide funds, but if no one is doing that, well, they have to spend those funds somehow. And so, for instance, I developed the Ukrainian dictionary of firefighting terminology, and I established a department. We were teaching students, but there was no Ukrainian dictionary of firefighting terminology, and so therefore we needed that dictionary, and I was the one who created it. But when I was establishing contacts traveling, I discovered a school in Poland which started to create the Polish version of it. In Germany they started to create the German version, in Slovakia the Slovakian version, etc. And so this was a way for them to show the things that they are capable to do, but to continue this kind of work there was a need of some grants. And for instance, I heard the proposal to provide like 125,000 euros for 2 years. And so if the project is successful, then the project is given to some other organization yet. And if our big department is split into two, well, maybe one department could be doing that for 2 years, another department for the next 2 years. This is, of course, a difficult task. We are being monitored and audited on a number of occasions on how exactly we are spending the money, but still, that's an interesting task, and actually the attitude to that is quite ambivalent, and the money is available, but there need to be some employees available, and they have to be able to deliver as a result. So if people know that I'm using external professionals, they want me to contact them instead. And so, for instance, I had among my materials the dictionary of transport terminology, road transport, and so people encouraged me to publish it. So I had one more dictionary, and there are also some funds available. And I also got interested in this patenting and also dictionaries, etc. So the money is available, but to get that money, there needs to be a team, and not just me. So I used one of your dictionaries, the dictionary of your firefighting terminology. Yeah, it was quite helpful on a number of occasions. And thank you so much. And we have a break for half an hour. And after that, we will have a small, interesting exercise. You will see what that will be.